Today let's talk about a topic a lot of new players are asking around recently, but something I've also had to wonder about when I started: which starting or tutorial should you begin with? When you create a character right under your name, you get an option to choose whether you'd like to start with the Shadows of Angmar or before the Shadow scenario as your introduction to Lotro, with an optional skip choice. These are two quite different beginnings to the game, and I'll try to describe the differences, the pros and cons of each, and what I found the community also thinks of them, so you can make your own choice. Let's start with Shadows of Angmar, the original starter choice that has been with Lotro since the very beginnings. If you're someone who's drawn to the classic Middle-earth vibes and want to see more familiar areas you remember from the books or even the movies, that's what this beginning is more aimed towards. The Shadows of Angmar tutorial takes you back to Lord of the Rings roots, where you get to follow the early journeys of the Fellowship to iconic starting areas like the Shire, the town of Bree, or Weathertop. It of course also has some downsides, like the fact that this is the original tutorial for Lotro, which means you'll be seeing very old school MMORPG and questing designs that tend to be on the slower side of today's standards, and if you're a player who can get impatient or frustrated with older games and is used to the faster leveling and questing of newer MMOs, this might feel outdated. Regardless, Shadows of Angmar will undoubtedly cause several nostalgic and giddy moments you'll recognize from Lord of the Rings, and I think is the standard great entry into Lotro. Now let's talk a little bit about the setting of Before the Shadow. Released in 2022, this is basically a modern alternate tutorial to Lord of the Rings Online and the faster starting experience designed for both new and returning players. Here you start in the town of Mossward in Swanfleet, and with the help of rangers assist the nearby villagers in uncovering a new dangerous enemy and help defending against them. The new areas are visually more updated and the quests are also more modern in comparison, while still offering a very good amount of iconic Lord of the Rings moments if you're a big fan, from looking into the past of Celebrimbor and the creation of the rings, or assisting Boromir on his way towards Rivendell. Before the Shadow also has a bit more voice acting overall. It's not fully voiced, but it helps a ton with immersion, and like I said, it is a modern tutorial which was designed to be a smoother and more gameplay-centric starting point with a lot of action. Though keep in mind these two areas only have a different beginning, and the story does meet up at around Rivendell, but wherever you start you're able to go over to the other tutorial and do that as well. It's just a matter of where you start and do you want to do the others or not. I would say that's a decent amount of introduction for the setting and the vibe of the two areas to help you choose which one you're more interested in, but if we want to summarize and get into other details as well, what are the pros and cons of the two different starting zones? For the classic Shadows of Angmar, it is a slower and older design, but I think it is the better and more streamlined tutorial experience for someone who is just getting into the game from absolutely zero, and you'll be introduced to the different parts of the game like crafting more organically. It starts in classic areas of Lord of the Rings like the Shire or Bree that certainly puts a smile on your face, especially since you'll be following Frodo and Strider before they arrive to Rivendell. Since it is the older content, the items and rewards you'll get won't be as good. Crafting will be a big help here, but I've personally found the deeds, your in-game achievements, to be a lot better compared to Before the Shadow and afford you easier and more virtue experience, which is a core element to the game you should somewhat care about or at least learn early on. On the other hand, Before the Shadow is a modern, more streamlined experience designed to help players get into the game a lot faster and learn the basics, both gameplay-wise and the items you're getting. Since the rewards are so much better, it's not even a fair comparison. I'd say it's like a crash course to Lotro. While I personally would say it's definitely not going to be as iconic beginning like the other starting locations are, Before the Shadow still introduces a very solid alternate storyline, what's happening in other places other than Bree, what happened with Boromir on his way towards Rivendell, and what are these Uruk-hai and undead doing around here, accompanied by quite a bit more voice acting than you would normally get. So make no mistake, Before the Shadow still has some very epic Lord of the Rings moment you would definitely want to see. At the same time, I felt Before the Shadow is somewhat emptier when it comes to world design or the zones themselves. There's somewhat of a disconnect for me between the villages and the towns, but of course that's also because it's a more rural zone overall. It still contributed to the feeling that things weren't as smooth as with the normal start, and it felt a bit more gamey. And once you tie back into the main story, remember that the following quests after that assume that you have done the normal Bree beginning and will have multiple references that you might not understand and will feel confused. So doing both beginnings I think is still the best way no matter what you choose. You will find online that crafting is introduced a lot later or you don't get mounts, but I think those are older comments and should ignore, as with my recent experience, you're almost instantly sent to do crafting and you also receive a starting mount quite early, so I think the developers fixed this part. Finally, I would say Before the Shadow definitely has tougher deeds that are grindier and force you to farm more for virtue experience that you would likely not want to bother with this much, and you will end up weaker if you ignore it. Now I know, to not be too biased, I also looked into what parts of the Lotro community think, or at least what individuals share about it online, and the most popular consensus, at least that I found, is that for the very first characters, most seem to recommend the classic Shadows of Angmar beginning, and then go with Before the Shadow on an alt character or visit these zones after, to get an alternate beginning story if you want the best experience. I do tend to agree with this approach for the reasons I listed. Before the Shadow is absolutely amazing, but if you care about the lore and the traditional entry into Middle-earth, I think Shadows of Angmar is just better for that purpose, and if you want to level up fast, and you started Lord of the Rings Online for gameplay or for whatever reason you just want to get on with the leveling and get great gear, then perhaps Before the Shadow in that case is a better choice for you. Otherwise, you can just do it after Bree or with a second character, and it's gonna be a fantastic experience. All in all, that would be my personal summary and recommendation for which zone or starting tutorial a new player should start within Lotro. It's definitely a more biased opinion towards Shadows of Angmar, for lore and immersion reasons most of all, but I just truly think for a Lord of the Rings fan, following the steps of the Fellowship for the first time will put more smiles on your face and hook you more into the game than if you start with Before the Shadow and God forbid quit the game before you reach the cooler segments of that beginning. Let me know what you all think, especially veteran players, please share your thoughts. But also if you watched the video this far, do comment Boromir below so I know it. I really appreciate you all, but this is it for today. Like and subscribe for more Lord of the Rings Online content, and I'll be back with more next time. Bye bye.